Hello, I thought we'd have a look at LEDs in regard to these little radio-controlled vehicles. It's something I don't know a massive amount about at all. I'm by no means an expert in electronics or anything like that, but I have used a few LEDs in these little vehicles. Now, again, we're the beneficiary of lots of technology and development. In model railways, traditionally, we used grain of wheat bulbs, which were conventional bulbs, and we were led to believe for many, many years they were the smallest available. Now, this is a packet of grain of wheat bulbs, and we can just about see a bulb there. And the bulb itself is about 6 mil long by about 3 mil diameter, and that was considered very small of its time, and those were fitted to headlamps of locos and that sort of thing in the 70s and that sort of period. And they did a good job for many, many years, and people used them for lighting buildings and this sort of thing. Of course, long since we've had LEDs. Now, this is the standard size of LED that everyone's used to. That's appropriate for a panel, and certainly my layout panel for switching points and things has this type of LED in. In fact, I use red and green. This is a white one used for testing, but that's a very common size. As you can see, completely useless when it comes to fitting to a scale model. That, of course, is a cab for a 4 mil Bedford TK. So we need something a lot smaller than that. Along come a useful size of LED. These are 3 mil LEDs, red LEDs, and these are the type I most commonly use in the 7 mil scale wagons as brake lights, and indeed the 7 mil TK is fitted with these 3 mil LEDs, one on each side, and the legs are bent, insulated, and go through, and in fact they have a resistor in series, because of course these are happiest on something like 3 volts, and I'm feeding them 3.7 volts, something like that, so they require a resistor to go through them. However, these LEDs, small and useful though they are still too big for 7 mil cars or 7 mil vans. This is an Austin 7, and you can see that's getting clumsily large for a 7 mil car. Now, this has been fitted with brake lights. They're painted black at the back, so it's difficult for you to see, but there is an LED there and there, and as you can see, that's very much smaller. Similarly, it has to fit in the wheel arch and clear the wheel. So these nice 3 mil LEDs won't do, and the next option down is these little things, which are, sorry, I'm just getting them out of the packet, 1.8mm LEDs. And these, if you can see, have a rectangular body with a domed lens, and they're usefully smaller, and you can drill a 1.8mm hole through whatever your vehicle is and poke the domed lens through the body to be seen. But even those can be a little bit bulky. So we have a further development, and what I'm about to produce here, oops, I've got two of them, are the same thing, but in fact even a little bit smaller. And what is also of note is the legs come out the sides, which can be extremely useful. So you can see that is another variant as well, and even more compact. The lens is the same size, but the body is a bit slimmer. And of course, when you're fighting for space in a small vehicle, even that millimetre is really, really valuable. So that also 1.8mm red LED, but terribly, terribly useful to say the least. And those, I beg your pardon, that is 1.7mm, not 1.8, I lie, 1.7mm axial LED. And in fact that one comes from Railroom Electronics, and a very, very useful little LED that is. So at that point you kind of think you've seen it all, and indeed that little 1.7mm LED is the smallest I've ever fitted to any of my 7mm vehicles. However, of course, if we take this 4mm TK, we can see that, small though this 1.8mm I've got in my hand is, it's in no way appropriate for a 4mm vehicle. It's just clumsily large, and frankly you can't really make it work. Therefore one needs something even smaller, and thank heavens you can buy things smaller. You can buy these things ordered from China on eBay, and these things are pre-wired, and by gum they need to be pre-wired, and on the end of each pair of wires, let me just undo these, oh dear, these are small. That there is an LED. I'm assured it's a red LED. I've not checked it yet. I am about to check it. It's so small I can't really even see which way round it goes. But I'm hoping that if I put a battery to it, it might even show up red. We'll see. But on a practical note, at least we can see that, assuming it works, if I were to glue said LED to the lorry like that, it is not going to look too obtrusive, and the wires are fine enough that I can lose them. So these ridiculously small LEDs are the answer to lighting on very, very small models. Now you can get these in different colours. You can get them in warm white, in cool white, in yellow, in blue even if you want, and of course these that I have are in red. They can be quite pricey, but if you shop around, don't just buy the first you see, but if you look, you can buy them quite cheaply. These were in the region of £3 for 10, and I consider that extremely cheap for what they are. So, as with so many things nowadays, if you look hard enough, you can find the answer to what you need. Right, so I'm going to see if I can get some volts through this and see if it works. Bear with me. Right, now I've wired up a resistor with this. I've put a 470k resistor in series with this. Oops, daisy. And we do indeed have lights. They're a little bit bright, so I might put a slightly higher resistor in with it. But by gum, that teeny little thing is a bit of magic. Absolutely extraordinary. I'm just going to take this battery off and make it safe. The only negative thing I have to say about it at all is the wire, or the wires, are so thin, because they need to be. It's very hard to strip the insulation off, because the insulation itself is so very, very thin. So one has to be very, very careful taking the insulation off to make a connection. But that's by no means unreasonable. So, what wonderful little LEDs. And I will fit a pair of these to this TK and give it working brake lights. If I was so inclined, I could put headlights and indicators on in exactly the same way, but I tend not to do that, because for me these models work on the railway, and it's all about the model railway and working with the railway, as opposed to simply driving a model lorry about, and it all becoming about driving a model lorry and playing with the model lorry. It's about creating a scene and a working railway for me, rather than, as I say, simply playing with a model lorry that does all sorts of particularly clever things. That's why I don't fully go to town with these things. But brake lights, I think, is fair game. So I'm extremely pleased with those little LEDs. They're very cheap. They seem to be terribly effective. It's going to be interesting to wire them in, because they're all so delicate. I shall use epoxy resin to glue them on, and I shall put some epoxy over the face as well, which will protect them, and of course the light will shine through the epoxy, so that won't be a problem. I shall try a 1K resistor to dim it down a bit. As I say, the 470 looks to me a little bit bright, but we'll see. So very, very briefly, that is the story on what LEDs are available. The other thing I'd mention is I use Deltang receivers, which are superb. They tend to be about 10 millimeters square, very reliable, and they have facilities for lighting, for headlights, for indicators, for brake lights, etc. built in. The one thing that confused me initially, because I don't think it's mentioned in any instructions anywhere, is that the feed for brake lights from the receiver, the wire that you wire the LEDs to that actually operates the things, is actually the negative. It is not the positive. And of course, when I first did it, I wired them up backwards. I sort of assumed the feed from the receiver would be a positive, and of course it didn't work. It isn't. It's the negative, so you attach the wire from the receiver to the negative leg of the LED, and you provide a positive feed straight from the not the battery, but after the on-off switch, straight to the positive leg of the diodes, and that completes the circuit. That makes it work very, very well. Once you know that, it becomes a very simple, straightforward job to do it, and it just adds that extra little touch. So there we go. That's LEDs very simply on these little models. Hope you find that useful.